Have you ever felt the chill of an empty building, where every shadow seems to hide something you can't quite explain? What if that silence was broken, not by a scream, but by something even more terrifying, something that could leave you battered and broken in seconds? With no one to help? In Detroit, a place where the factories echo with the ghosts of the past, a security guard faced a nightmare that no one could have prepared him for. What drives a group of teenagers to attack an innocent man without reason? And what happens when those who are supposed to protect you don't? Imagine being left for dead, bleeding on the cold concrete, and knowing the system won't find your attackers. Keep watching, because the true horror lies not in the attack itself, but in the mystery that followed, one that may never have an answer. Let's dive into the chilling story of a night shift that turned into a fight for survival. There's something eerily calming about the quiet hum of an empty building. The stillness that settles over a factory once the last shift is over. Just you and the flickering lights. The low buzz of old machinery. And the soft, steady ticking of the security cameras. For 6 months, this was my world. I'd settle into the small security office, sipping my coffee, keeping an eye on the camera feeds. Just doing my job, night after night. Nothing much ever happened. The occasional rat scurrying across the floor or the soft squeal of a rusty door opening in the wind. But that was it. It was a job that paid the bills. And at the end of the day, that's all I needed. I worked the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., every night. The factory, once a thriving hub of auto part production, now felt like an abandoned ghost town. Most of the buildings were empty, a few still running, but at night, everything seemed frozen in time. Dilapidated walls, long hallways, and the kind of silence that presses in on you from all sides. It was lonely, sure, but safe, or so I thought. I'd start each shift by walking the halls, checking the doors, making sure everything was locked up tight. Then, I'd return to the office, boot up the monitors, and settle in. I'd check the cameras, doze off here and there, and wait for my next walk around. Routine, predictable, that's what night shifts are, right? But even in the quiet, sometimes, your eyes start playing tricks on you. You swear you see something move in the shadows, something just out of reach of the camera's eye. It's a normal part of the job. After all, cameras don't catch everything, or do they? One night, around 3 a.m., I was checking the screens when something caught my attention. Camera 3, the back-loading dock. It was dark, almost too dark, but I could swear something shifted in the corner of the screen. A shadow, too quick to be a person walking. I leaned closer, squinting, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Could have been nothing. Maybe it was the wind blowing trash, I thought. But then, I saw it again. A shape moving fast, too fast, darting across the screen. I don't know what made me grab my jacket and flashlight. Maybe it was just boredom. Maybe a sense of duty. But I stood up, grabbed my gear, and walked out. The cold Michigan air hit me like a slap in the face as I stepped outside. The factory felt different at night. The wind howled through the alleys between the buildings, and the shadows seemed to reach for me. I made my way to the back-loading dock, shining my flashlight into every corner, every dark space. Everything looked normal. The door was locked, the fence was intact, nothing seemed out of place. But that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. That feeling, like I was being watched. Maybe it was nothing, but then again, it never hurts to check. What I didn't know, as I stood there in the cold, was that the shadows weren't just there to scare me. They were hiding something far worse. And soon, I'd find out just how quickly routine can turn into something far darker. Let's pause here. You see, that night wasn't like the others. What followed would change everything I thought I knew about safety, about routine, and about what can happen when the shadows come alive. But before I tell you what happened, let's take a closer look at the scene. The camera footage, the blood stains, and the testimony that would leave more questions than answers. At first, I thought it was just the wind. The flicker on camera 3. That shadow darting past the back-loading dock. Could have been anything. Maybe trash blowing across the lot or some rat scurrying in the dark. But when I saw it again, clearer this time, sharper, I knew something wasn't right. I grabbed my flashlight and my jacket, my heart starting to pick up speed. As I stepped outside into the bitter cold, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was as if the whole factory, silent and still, was holding its breath. My flashlight cut through the dark, sweeping across the empty buildings, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and stretch like they were alive. The wind howled between the buildings, but there was no movement beyond that. I reached the loading dock and checked the door, locked. Secure. The fence was solid. No sign of anyone trying to break in. So why did I feel like someone was watching me? That's when I heard it. A quiet snicker, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. I froze, straining my ears. And then, out of the shadows, they came. I never saw them coming. Not until it was too late. 4 or 5 of them. Young, their faces hidden behind masks. Halloween masks. The kind you buy at a corner store for $1. But the look in their eyes. The way they moved. It was something far more dangerous than a joke. They were fast. Too fast. The first one shoved me. Hard. And I stumbled back, almost losing my flashlight. Before I could even react, another one punched me in the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I doubled over, gasping for breath, and that's when the real beating started. They moved like a pack of animals, kicking and hitting without mercy. My flashlight was ripped from my hand before I even had a chance to swing it at them. The pain came in waves, each blow worse than the last. I tried to scream, to fight back, but my body wouldn't respond. I hit the ground hard, gravel scraping against my skin, my knees buckling beneath me. They didn't stop. Kicks landed on my ribs, my back, my arms. I curled into a ball, trying to protect my head, but it didn't matter. The blows kept coming, and through it all, I heard them laughing. It wasn't a joyful laugh, though. It was manic, cruel, like they were having fun. I didn't know how long it went on. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. It felt like an eternity. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went black. One final blow to my head, and I was gone. When I came to, the world was still dark. Cold. My face was pressed against the gravel, my body screaming in pain. Blood trickled down my face, and I could taste it in my mouth. I tried to move, but my hands wouldn't work right, and every breath sent a stab of pain through my ribs. My clothes were torn, my shoes gone. They'd taken my Air Jordans. I spat out blood, feeling for my wallet, and thankfully, it was still there. They didn't want my money. It seemed, they just wanted to hurt me. I managed to push myself up, though it felt like the world was spinning. My legs were weak, my body heavy with the weight of pain. Every step was a fight, but I made it back to the security office. Collapsing into the chair, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. I managed to mumble something about being attacked, giving them the address, but after that, I just sat there, waiting. The paramedics arrived quickly, their lights flashing. They loaded me onto a stretcher, asking what had happened, but I could barely speak. My jaw hurt too much. They took me to the hospital, where the doctors confirmed what I already knew: broken ribs, a concussion, fractured fingers, and a busted-up face. They even had to pull out some of my teeth. The cops came by while I was still recovering. 2 officers, one older, one younger. They asked me to describe the attackers, but I didn't have much to give. They were wearing masks, and it had been too dark. I told them they were young, fast, laughing like maniacs. That was all I knew. They promised to look into it, but I don't think I ever heard from them again. They never caught those kids. I didn't think they would. In a city like Detroit, there are too many shadows for anyone to hide in. And maybe that's the scariest part, that these kids, whoever they were, could just disappear. But that's not the worst part. The worst part was how the attack left me. How it changed me. The pain, the fear, and the not knowing. What had they really wanted? Why did they do it? Why me? The police never found answers. And I wasn't sure I would ever get any. But even though those answers may never come, something else was clear. I had to keep going. For my kids. For myself. There was no other choice. Now, let's take a moment to think about something more. About the impact of violence on the mind and soul. And how, sometimes, the true fight begins long after the physical wounds have healed. I woke up to the cold, hard ground pressing against my face. The smell of blood mixed with the sharp, bitter scent of night air. It took me a moment to process where I was. My body ached, every inch of it screaming with pain. My head throbbed like a drum. And when I tried to move, I felt a sharp sting in my ribs. I spat out blood, and the taste of it lingered bitterly in my mouth. My nose, already swollen, felt like it might collapse with the slightest movement. My hands were stiff, shaking uncontrollably, like I couldn't even control them anymore. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented, dizzy from the blow to my head. Every step felt like dragging a weight behind me. But I had to move. I had to get back to the security office, to call for help, because no one else would. My shoes, my prized Air Jordans, were gone. They'd taken those too. I felt the emptiness in my chest, not just from the physical pain, but from the realization that it was senseless. The kids hadn't even taken my wallet. They didn't want money. They wanted something else. They wanted to hurt me. The trip back to the office seemed endless. My body, battered and broken, barely responded. I could feel blood dripping from my face, my nose still gushing. My ribs felt like they were on fire with every breath I took. But somehow, I made it to that chair in the office, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. When the paramedics arrived, I didn't even have the strength to tell them what happened. They just loaded me up, asking the usual questions, but I was too far gone. I just wanted to sleep. But even as they wheeled me into the hospital, I knew the worst of the pain wasn't physical. That would heal. But what about everything else? The doctors confirmed what I already knew: broken ribs, a concussion, fractured fingers, cuts, bruises, and some missing teeth. The injuries were severe, but nothing that wouldn't heal, they said, at least physically. But the worst part? I didn't know how to heal what was going on inside me. The psychological damage came fast and brutal. I found myself replaying that moment over and over again. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear their laughter, those kids, laughing like it was a game, kicking and punching without a care. It made me sick, thinking about how much they enjoyed it. But what bothered me more was that I couldn't understand why. Why me? What did I ever do to them? Why was I just a target in some twisted game? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The attack, the way they didn't care. It haunted me more than the bruises, more than the broken bones. It wasn't just the physical trauma, it was the fear. The fear that, despite everything, I couldn't protect myself. And that's something you can't just heal with stitches or bandages. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, painkillers, and bandages. The physical pain was bad, but the emotional toll? That was a whole different battle. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, their masks. The memories of their laughter filled the silence of my apartment. I couldn't escape it. When the police came to visit me, it wasn't much better. They were polite, professional, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. When I told them about the attack, about how young they looked and how fast they were, I could see them jotting down notes. But I knew it didn't matter. The fact that they wore masks and that it was so dark meant they had nothing to go on. No leads, nothing. I could feel the weight of it, the hopelessness of it. The cameras had caught the shadows moving, but not much more. There was blood at the scene. My blood, smeared across the gravel where I'd been beaten. But that was it. No faces, no clues. The police promised they'd look into it, but I didn't expect much. And deep down, I knew it was pointless. Those kids were gone, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. The hardest part, though, telling my family, telling my kids that I was okay, when I knew I wasn't. My daughter cried when she saw me, bruised and broken. She asked what happened, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. I told her it was just an accident at work, that I was fine, that I'd be okay. But how could I be okay? How could I lie to them and say everything was fine when it wasn't? My son tried to act tough, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He knew something was wrong, and I couldn't protect him from it. I couldn't protect myself from it either. The hospital gave me painkillers, but nothing could numb the fear that I wasn't safe anymore, the fear that it could happen again. And the worst part? I had no idea who these kids were. No names, no faces, just shadows in the dark. And I wasn't sure I'd ever feel safe again. But here's the thing, they didn't break me. Not entirely. Yeah, I'm still scared. Yeah, it still hurts. But you learn something after an experience like that. You learn how quickly everything can change. How, in an instant, your whole world can be turned upside down. And even though I'll never forget that night, I've got to keep going. For my kids, for myself. Now, let's talk about something else that's been haunting me, the feeling of powerlessness. The injustice that follows when the system fails you. How do you move forward when the world tells you that the ones who hurt you might never be caught? Let's dive into that next. The first few days after the attack were a blur of pain and confusion. I spent my time in the hospital, my body still healing from the assault. While the police worked to gather information, they came by twice in the days following the incident. The first time, they took my statement, asked about what happened, and about the kids who had attacked me. I gave them everything I could remember, their age, the masks they wore, the laughter that made my skin crawl. But there wasn't much to go on. How could there be? They were fast, in and out, and the whole thing had happened so quickly. It was dark, and all the cameras showed were shadows. The second time they came, they told me about the camera footage they'd reviewed. The security cameras outside the factory had caught the silhouettes of the attackers. But that was it. No clear faces. No details that could lead to an arrest. The cameras had picked up the movement, quick flashes of kids running, ducking in and out of the frame, but nothing more. They couldn't even tell which direction they'd come from or where they'd gone afterward. It was a dead end. And that frustrated me more than anything. I couldn't help but feel betrayed by the system. There was physical evidence, my blood on the gravel, smeared where they'd beaten me. But it was like that evidence didn't matter. It didn't lead anywhere. It didn't have a face. No fingerprints. Nothing concrete. The officers told me they were doing everything they could. But I could feel it. They weren't optimistic. They weren't even sure they would find them. And it terrified me. I thought about the kids. The way they had attacked me without hesitation. What kind of person does that to another human being? Were they just having fun? Were they bored? Did they have a reason? I'll never know. They disappeared, just like that, leaving nothing but pain and unanswered questions in their wake. There were a few more interviews with the officers, and they asked about anyone I might have angered recently or if there were any issues with my coworkers. But the truth was, I was just doing my job. I didn't have any enemies. It was supposed to be a simple, quiet job, and yet, here I was, lying in a hospital bed, with nothing but a few bruised memories to hold on to. I remember feeling helpless, like the system had failed me. They weren't even looking for the right answers. In my opinion, they weren't trying to understand why it happened, only how. And without that why, how could they ever catch those kids? That's the question that kept me up at night. It wasn't just about justice for me. It was about understanding why these kids felt it was okay to do this. It was about finding some kind of truth. The worst part, though, the worst part was knowing that the kids were still out there, free to do whatever they wanted. They'd taken something from me, more than just my shoes or my dignity, but the police. The system couldn't seem to find a way to get it back. They had nothing, and that helplessness, the feeling that the world had abandoned me, was harder to bear than any physical wound. As the days passed, I did what I could to heal. My ribs hurt, my hands weren't working properly. But I had to keep going. I had to act like everything was fine. For my kids, they needed me to be okay. But I wasn't. How could I be? I remember my boss calling to check in. He was sorry about what had happened, of course. But his solution was to add more security, maybe even another guard. And that's when I realized, it didn't matter how many guards they added, how many cameras they installed. Because it wasn't the system that had failed me. It was the people, the ones who did this. And they weren't afraid of the system. They knew they could get away with it. So, what could I do? The police weren't going to find them. I wasn't sure anyone was going to. But maybe I could find my own way to protect myself. But before I got too deep into that thought, let's take a closer look at something even more unsettling: the psychological toll this kind of violence takes on you. It's not just about the attack itself. It's about what happens after. What happens when you're left to pick up the pieces of your shattered sense of safety? Let's dive into that next. In the weeks that followed, I found myself stuck in a strange place, physically healing but mentally stuck. Unable to move forward, the bruises on my body faded, and the broken ribs mended. But the mental scars lingered, invisible yet more painful than any wound. I tried to act like everything was fine. For my kids, for my family. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The police never found the kids who attacked me. And I think we both knew that they probably never would. The system had failed me. The cameras had caught the shadows. But the faces remained hidden. The blood stains, the traces of my fight for survival, were all evidence of a nightmare that no one could fully solve. I learned a hard truth. Sometimes, justice doesn't come. Sometimes, the system is just too slow, too broken to protect you when you need it most. But life, it seems, doesn't wait for justice to be served. The world keeps turning, and we have no choice but to keep up. I couldn't afford to be stuck in my anger or fear. I had a family depending on me. I had to find a way to heal, even if the answers weren't going to come from the cops or the courts. I started small. Going back to work wasn't easy. Every creak of the factory, every shadow, felt like a reminder of that night. The first few shifts, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for the next move. But as time passed, I learned to let go. Bit by bit, I couldn't undo what had happened, but I could take control of what came next. I began to find strength in the quiet moments, taking each day as it came. The bruises on my body healed, but more importantly, I started to regain my sense of safety. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore, I was trying to live. And that was a victory in itself. For the first time, I realized that moving forward wasn't about seeking revenge or finding those kids. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece. But I can't lie, sometimes I still think about those kids. I think about how they could have been different, how they could have been someone else. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd been able to stop them. If the system had been there to catch them. I know I'll never have those answers, but I've learned to live with the uncertainty. In the end, I'm just one guy, trying to rebuild. I may never get closure, but I can still find peace in the fact that I kept going. That's the hardest part, to keep going even when everything inside you wants to stop. Life doesn't stop for us to heal, and justice doesn't always arrive when we need it, but we can still find ways to move forward. For me, it was my kids, my family. And even when the world feels like it's closing in on you, you find strength in the people who matter the most. If you're struggling too, or if you've ever felt like the system failed you, you're not alone. Sometimes, healing comes from within, from your own strength, and from the support of the people who love you. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found any strength or understanding in this, please share it with someone who might need to hear it too. And if you've experienced something similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going. Together, we can all keep moving forward. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of survival and strength.